Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. Let me, right off the bat, point people to an interesting event taking place in New York City, and it's on the Saturday, the 21st of July, the first day when this program will be widely heard. This is in the afternoon of Saturday, July 21st in New York City. The location is the site of the World's Fair. So it's the Unisphere from 1964. If you want to get to this, you can take the 7 line and get off at Met's Willets Point, and then walk across the World's Fairgrounds to the Queen's Art Museum. The Queen's Art Museum, between there and the Unisphere, is where this is going to occur, and it's an interesting gathering. It has disparate elements. If you look at the website, it seems to be couched in New Age graphics and related stuff. There's stuff about lifestyle reform and what have you. But there are also some fairly serious elements in terms of Occupy. Some people left over from Occupy will be attending this. Some fairly well-known journalists. You can take a look at the website. It's at the New World's Fair, or the New World Fair, excuse me. The best way to find this is to go to tarpley.net, and at the near the top of tarpley.net, not at the top, but near the top, you'll find links to the website of this event, the New World Fair. So it's got all kinds of things going on, exhibitions, entertainment, God knows what. But then it has these 3 principal elements, New Age elements. It's got some people that have been associated with the Ron Paul agitation, shards of the Ron Paul fiasco, right? Flotsam and jetsam from the Ron Paul movement, which has now largely collapsed, at least among honest activists. And then some people left over from Occupy. And I'll tell you later in this broadcast, I think we'll have plenty of time to discuss what I'm trying to present to this group. It's an organizing perspective. It essentially says, in effect, the Ron Paul experiment has been a terrible failure. The idea of putting yourself under the leadership of David Graeber and Adbusters and the people who wrecked the Occupy movement, that's also a terrible failure. Obama, of course, is widely discredited. Reforming one's lifestyle or transcendental meditation. This is not for serious political agitators, and it's not for people that are seriously interested in politics. So what's left? Well, what's left is what works, and what has worked now is Syriza. To go from 4% to 27% within a period of just a few months, and to emerge as the second largest party, pushing aside one of the 2 major parties in the Greek system, that is success. And that, I think, is what will compel people's attention. Occupy, of course, has been a failure in the sense that whereas the Tea Party was able to get 75 or 80 people into Congress and a half a dozen senators, and in a certain way they had a presidential candidate, if you want to call it that, and that will go on. By contrast, Occupy, 0, not on the scoreboard, no hope of getting anything, and I think, therefore, a very different mentality. But Syriza, obviously getting a lot of people elected to the parliament. And what's the secret? Well, it's not a secret. It's program. That's number 1, the 5-point program of Syriza. We'll go through it later in the broadcast. Having some leadership, right? Not just one person, but a competent cadre, a leadership group, people who have some experience and who know what to do. That they're not going to be disoriented or duped by the next thing that NATO intelligence throws at them, or anybody else's intelligence. Then you have to have an organization. That, I think, is absolutely critical. Again, with Syriza, it's about a dozen different components. And some of these were quite small. Sects, splinter parties, groups, groupuscules, grouplets, whatever. You got to bring them together, and it can be more than 12. And in a country like this, it would have to be more than 12. And finally, a strategy, which is how do you get to contend for power? And the main one is don't be a part of any austerity regimes. So I think that's what works. I'm going to try to motivate people coming to this event if they want to attend my remarks. Essentially, an exhortation to get busy on this front because the lame duck session of Congress is coming. That's in December. We're hearing all this gobbledygook about a fiscal cliff. This is a tremendous success for Frank Luntz and the Republican mind-benders, the Cyber operators, and what have you, that the U.S. is going to go off a fiscal cliff if taxes are raised. I think this is hysteria. And at the same time, that there's got to be a grand bargain. There's got to be genocidal austerity at the expense of entitlements and related things. And this is the bipartisan consensus, at least largely behind the scenes. Republicans are always hard to get for such a consensus because of their well-known tax obsessions. But still, that's what's coming up. Some orgy, some witches' Sabbath of austerity ghouls coming, right, with the Simpson-Bowles plan being dredged up and the Domenici-Rivlin plan being dredged up. So if you don't want to be lambs to the slaughter by the time we get to December, really this presidential election is not the only game in town, and it may not be the main one. What is essential is that there be some form of organized resistance by the time we get to December. And I'm proposing, call that the National Anti-Austerity Committees. The National Anti-Austerity Committee or committees. You can call it the Emergency National Anti-Austerity Committees. You could call it the Anti-Austerity Demonstration. Another proposal that has come up is to call it the New Deal Coalition, and I think that's fine too. There are no, at this late point in world history, there are no names that are not somehow tainted by misuse. There is the problem also, many people still don't know what austerity means. Well, they're going to get a lesson in that if they don't take this seriously. So anyway, that's the gist of what I hope to convince some people of at this event. So please go to tarpley.net. If you're in New York City, you've got time, right? You can jump on the subway and be out there in a flash. Come to the New York World's Fairgrounds between the Queen's Art Museum and the Unisphere. I'm going to be speaking slightly after 4 o'clock, about 4:30, I think, 4:20 in the afternoon is my story. And I'll be there for book signings. If you have books that you want to get autographed, we can do that too. And I hope you'll come ready to buy some, because I'll have some available. So that's this interesting event. And I think also it'll be interesting in terms of the other speakers and sort of the mix of people coming together. So, but the goal, again, it's got to be where you're going to be in December, and is there ever going to be an organized resistance not sabotaged by Graeber, Adbusters, and NATO intelligence, and then not sabotaged by the leprechaun, right, by the combination of Southern jurisdiction, Scottish Rite Freemasons, and Mormons. And we'll have a whole story to tell you about Mormons when we come back on World Crisis Radio. To World Crisis Radio. So just one last mention, if you haven't seen it, if you're anywhere near New York City, come over on the afternoon of Saturday, July 1st, to the World's Fair between the Unisphere and the Queen's Art Museum. I'll be speaking at about 4:20 in the afternoon. So if you're hearing this right off the bat at 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon Eastern, you've got a couple of hours to get over there, and I hope you will. Now, the other thing we want to go through today later is the 20th anniversary of the Bush bio. George Bush, that's George H.W. Bush, Bush the Elder, the unauthorized biography, presented at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., 20 years ago this week. 20 years. And this book, of course, has become an internet legend. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But let's get right to the Syrian strategic news, which will then lead us into the superpower situation. Preface to this is, remember what we had last week from David Ignatius, going to the brink in the Middle East, of the Washington Post on Thursday, July 12th. Saudi Arabia, he had reported, this had been known, had suspended military leaves, vacations for security officials, military officials. So some idea that the big push against Syria is coming. Now, of course, not much reported in this country, but the Saudis have problems of their own, and well, they deserve them. These reactionaries, these feudal monarchs, these absolutists, right, things that are really unheard of anywhere else in the world, you'll find them out there in the Gulf, right? These oil monarchies, but reactionary, feudal, British puppet states, completely complicit with the U.S., with the Israelis, and so forth, the kind of people that got into big polemics with President Nasser of Egypt. They're getting ready for something, and we could obviously tell what it was. I think we had some of this last week, and for some of it, I would urge you to go back and look at my Twitter feed, Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter, and you will see that there is some idea in the Twitter feed that something big was going to happen vis-a-vis Syria. And this is really what has now come to pass. Starting last weekend, starting really on Sunday, the 15th of July. That, I think, is the beginning. That is when the Syrian rebels announced that they would have an attack, an offensive against Damascus. Now, this didn't come out of a clear blue sky, and we had been following that also, especially on the Twitter feed, which I highly recommend. Hillary Clinton, as people will recall, Hillary Clinton came forward around the 8th of July. On the 8th of July, Hillary Clinton, using rhetoric worthy of Nazi Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop, who had a very bad time at Nuremberg, you can look that up, she gave this landmark speech, a raving speech on July 8th, saying that there is little time left for the Damascus government to avoid a, quote, catastrophic assault, unquote, that would destroy the Syrian state. I think that was a pretty clear indication that the Ben Rhodes plan was about to become operational, because this is what we now have. The Ben Rhodes plan, you'll recall, was revealed by Thierry Meyssan of the Voltaire Network on the 11th of June. And here we basically have a three-pronged operation. The first is that the U.S. ambassador to Saudi Arabia, British representatives Prince Bandar and his clique in Saudi Arabia, they were targeting Nilesat and Arabsat. Unfortunately, many of the national television networks in the Middle East don't have landlines. They don't have a way to broadcast, to have a central studio, which is then linked by either microwaves or whatever, and then to broadcast that in conventional terms. It's very heavily dependent on satellite. So this means the U.S. Space Command, I guess, gets into the act. The idea being that you have two main satellites. One is Nilesat, the other Arabsat. We've talked about this in the past. So one of the meetings was about how do you get control of Nilesat, Arabsat, and convince them to terminate the broadcasts of any broadcasters from Syria, Lebanon especially, but also from others, right? And there's been an attempt to drive Press TV out of these things, and there's also been a drive to try to what can we say, disorient Russia Today, which has succeeded to some extent, right? With Ron Paul and Julian Assange and that guy Farage of the British Chauvinist Party. Those people have been trying to get some kind of a media monopoly or news monopoly. So the idea was the first step is you shut down the pro-Syrian government channels on Nilesat, Arabsat. It includes Syrian state television, Al Dunya, Sham, and some of the Lebanese stations that are sympathetic to Assad. So that's number one. And according to reports that I've gotten in the last 48 hours, that part is already happening. In other words, if you listen to my debate on Press TV from a couple of days ago, it's posted for this week. You'll see that one of the participants reports that the news channels in Syria and around Syria are being interrupted. In other words, there are breakdowns in the signal for the Syrian state television, Dunya, and so forth. So that's one side. If you go to the website of the Syrian Electronic Army, make sure you have the authentic one and not a NATO imitation. But if you go to the website of the Syrian Electronic Army, you will find there they believe that a fake version of Al Dunya is imminent, that it's coming soon. It's in the final stages of preparation. So here we already have two of the three steps. Get control of Arabsat, Nilesat, interrupt the real broadcast of Syrian state television, Dunya, Sham, and other pro-Assad or at least anti-death squad broadcasters, but then introduce a fake program, and that seems to be the next step. Hasn't happened yet, but is reported to be imminent. We'll be back in a minute. On 48 hours, we have multiple indications that the Ben Rhodes plan has been activated. We have first the interruption of the signal of Syrian state television, Dunya, Sham, and other not hostile to Assad stations by Arabsat, Nilesat. That's one side. And then if you go to the Syrian Electronic Army, they're telling you that a fake Al Dunya is about to go on the air. So this is pretty much what you expect, right? Since Mason put that article up on June 11th, the question has been when would that start? Certainly Hillary Clinton making this raving speech on July 8th that there was little time left for the Syrian government to avoid a catastrophic assault which would destroy the state, which would smash the Syrian state. Then on the 12th of July, you've got this signal piece, is the way I would read it, by David Ignatius. We stressed it last week. Going to the brink in the Middle East, and it could be that the mobilization of Saudi Arabia might end up the way the mobilization of Germany, France, Russia, Austria-Hungary, and others ended up in 1914. So what he's talking about is the guns of August, right? So the guns of August are followed by preceded by a July of illusions. Are we in such a July of illusions right now? Well, things are indeed pretty hot, and we've got to entertain this quite seriously. That July 2012 may be similar to that other July 98 years ago. That would be the July of 1914. And I've reviewed in the past that there's a whole literature about the la-la land of European intellectuals. You see this in all different countries. There's a whole series of novels and studies written about this. The illusion, the lack of reality, and that indeed may be where we are right now. In any case, by Sunday, July 15th, you've got the death squads, the so-called Free Syrian Army, announcing that they are going to begin the Battle of Damascus. And then, on July 18th, we get the break in the situation, which is the alleged, and I have to say I would pick this with great skepticism, but still, it seems to be the case. Some people got killed. We don't know when. We don't really know how. But we have the defense minister of Syria, Raja. He is the top Christian in the government. Isn't it interesting they pick the most prominent Christian official in the Assad government and kill him? Then Turkmani, the crisis management chief, Shaukat, I believe the deputy defense minister, in any case, brother-in-law to Assad, and then succumbing to wounds a couple of days later, Bektiar, the chief of intelligence. So 4 important officials. Now, there are unconfirmed reports that Russian consultants were either killed or wounded in this attack. Don't know what to make of those, but it's certainly possible. Now, at that point, you could see the third phase of the Ben Rhodes plan, right? Not just controlling Arabsat, Nilesat, cutting off the pro-Assad broadcast, not just concocting fake Al Dunia, fake Syrian national television, but then there's the question of presenting this to the world, right? And we know here, of course, France 24, the BBC, CNN, you name it, they're all going to be attempting, Al Jazeera, attempting to lead the charge on that. And that is what you saw on this Wednesday, the 18th of July. An attempt to convince the world through panic and hysteria that the Syrian regime was collapsing. It's all over. That the old guard is gone. They've been wiped out, and everybody's running for their life. Panic. And instead, well, no. And I think that's a lesson. Don't lose your head. Don't panic. Don't believe stories told by NATO media. They were saying the Palestinians inside Syria have taken up arms and are attacking the government. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but I wouldn't believe it at this point without some confirmation. Now, you have to understand, this is the essence of it. It is psychological warfare. It's information warfare. It's mass brainwashing. This is MK Ultra. MK Ultra, mind control. MK feeds into this. These are propaganda technicians. These are big lie artists. Remember that the official title for our dear friend Ben Rhodes in the White House is that he is the Deputy National Security Advisor for Strategic Communication in the Obama White House. He was the boss of Plouffe, right? You see Plouffe on TV sometimes now. Remember that the Obama campaign was Axelrod campaign manager, then communications director in the broad sense, Rhodes, and Plouffe, the speechwriter, right, this young nihilist whelp, he was subordinate to Rhodes. So Rhodes is really the guy who brainwashed the American people in 2007, 2008, that Obama was an agent of hope and change. And now the goal is psychological warfare, convince the Syrian people, proud and unconquered as they are, convince the Syrian people that they're already defeated, that the government is gone, that chaos is at hand, that the earth is gaping beneath their feet, that resistance is useless. Time to accept a neo-colonial occupation government controlled by NATO and the Israelis. Knuckle under, give up, throw down your weapons, right, and run for your life, skedaddle, get out of there. You get the idea. And this is what they hype. Therefore, what we require is a mindset of skepticism. Don't be gullible. Don't be a dupe. and don't buy every story about the end of the world. And I have to say here, the libertarian side of things, these people are eager to hear stories about the end of the world. Right? There's something about being a libertarian that you want to hear that the world is ending. I suppose you're looking forward to the moment where you can lock all your doors, get your trusty sidearm and your carbine, and get your food stocks and get your water filters and get your gold, and you can retreat into the cellar of the house and see how long you can hold out, right? Some fantastic vision. Well, this is not really the way it works. It's time for political organizing, which is in many ways the opposite of what we've just gone through. So this is where we are now. Now, the fact that the Syrian regime came nowhere near collapsing this week, not on Wednesday, not on Thursday, not on Friday, as far as I can see. This now poses the problem for NATO. What do you do next? You got to have a flow of apocalyptic news items. Some people may remember the technique here. You can see that it's Rhodes because it reminds you of the Obama campaign. Somewhere in one of my two books, either Obama, the Postmodern Coup, or Barack H. Obama, the Unauthorized Biography, I have an observer who says that the goal of the Obama campaign is to convince its opponents that their position is collapsing, that their world is coming to an end, that there's no hope left for them, that everybody's defecting, that all kinds of people that you thought were going to be opposing and going for somebody else, for Edwards or Hillary or whoever it was, that they've now capitulated and they've now joined the Obama juggernaut, right, the Obama bandwagon, and why don't you do the same thing? In other words, to convince people that their world is coming to an end. That was Rhodes 4 years ago for the American voter, and that's Rhodes again today. We'll be back in a minute. 20th anniversary of George H.W. Bush, the Unauthorized Biography. Buy a copy at Tarpley.net, through Amazon, or through Progressive Press of California. And remember, if you're just tuning in on the afternoon of Saturday, July 21st at about 4:20, I'm going to be speaking at the New York World's Fair site between the Queen's Art Museum and the Unisphere on the organizing perspective, followed by book signing and I'm sure discussion over a longer period of time. Now, I think that it is an important conclusion. Ben Rhodes is the guy who directed the brainwashing of the American people in 2007, 2008 to make you think that it was hopeless to resist Obama. This is especially for Democrats, people who were anti-Obama Democrats, who were Puma Democrats, pro-Hillary, pro-Edwards, pro-anybody but Obama. Undecided, right, uncommitted, had to wipe them out, right, using inside-outside jobs. So Ben Rhodes brainwashed the American people in 07, 08 about hope and change and Barack Obama. Now, Ben Rhodes is trying to brainwash the Syrian people that it's time to give up, that everything is collapsing. And once you understand this part, I think you are forearmed. We have many reports now in the follow-on. Let me just say, I don't believe we know anything about how these four officials were killed. They say it's an infiltrated suicide bomber. That, of course, is a story calculated to increase paranoia, right, splinter factor in the regime in Syria. We don't know. The NATO brainwash apparatus pushes these ideas. I would say you'd have to keep an open mind. You'd have to say this could have been a cruise missile. This could have been an unmanned aerial vehicle. Or if you go back and look, how was Rafiq Hariri of Lebanon assassinated some years ago? Certainly not by what Detlef Melis of the UN investigation wants to tell us. So that part is unknown. Now, what we do know we've always known, and it's been publicly admitted now in the New York Times, CIA officers are acting as traffic managers, as expediters and sorters along the border between southern Turkey and Syria. So the CIA is there directing the flow of weapons. The weapons are largely, I guess, purchased by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. They want to make sure that the best, most aggressive al-Qaeda death squads get the weapons on a priority basis. We've also got David Ignatius once again today, right? David Ignatius, the leaker-in-chief for this entire lunatic adventure. David Ignatius is telling us today that the CIA, under this, the idea that they're not supposed to provide lethal aid, not supposed to provide guns, I'm sure they do, but within that stricture, the CIA has been working with the Syrian opposition for several weeks under a non-lethal directive that allows the United States to evaluate groups and assist them with command and control. All right, command, control, communications for the death squads is the CIA. It means the death squads are under CIA command. And that's what we've been arguing here the entire time. That's not new. That's been so since last March, but in particular clear to me since October, November when I went there. So that's one side. The same article by David Ignatius. This is Thursday, July 19th. The search for a soft landing in Syria. Avoiding World War III, I guess. Every intelligence service is gaming it out concerning the opposition. And above all, the Israelis. And we quote here from David Ignatius, scores of Israeli intelligence officers are also operating along Syria's border, although they're keeping a low profile. Yeah, I'll bet. Now, in terms of gaming the post-Assad, here we have a character who has emerged now in the last couple of days. You got to watch him. And that is Steve Heidemann. Steve Heidemann of the U.S. Institute for Peace. U.S. Institute for Peace is a branch of the State Department. This is the U.S. government, right, in drag. And here we have Steve Heidemann, Heidemann, U.S. Institute for Peace. He was on the McNeil-Lehrer report at midweek, I think on Wednesday. He said his group, again, a subset of the State Department, had been meeting with a kind of kindergarten or stable of 50 Syrian opposition types to plan the post-Assad. And, of course, you can imagine abolish unions, remove food subsidies, bring in the International Monetary Fund, God knows what other horrors they're preparing, and I hope we don't find out. So all of that going on. Then we have the new propaganda lines. Remember, they're going to work with defections, right? Some of these people who defect are of no importance, right? Some of them you're better off without them, but they want to work with defections. They want to work with assassinations, right? We've just seen that this week has been dominated by the 4 assassinations. Now, the other big theme that they have is chemical weapons. Chemical weapons. Claims that Syria has a chemical weapons stockpile. They may. And then the U.S., of course, would have to go in and seize that. And the ever-helpful David Ignatius reminds us that last year in Libya, we had the CIA on the ground very early on going to the Wadan, W-A-D-D-A-N, the Wadan stockpile in Libya to grab control of chemical weapons, chemical artillery shells in a place called Sabha, S-A-B-H-A, town in the central desert, which is close to Gaddafi's ancestral home. So you get the idea that there are undoubtedly CIA teams on the ground now saying that they're there to help with these with these chemical weapons. The other one is the border crossings. We're told that the death squads have succeeded in taking control of some border crossings, and I think temporarily that's quite possible, because of course at the border crossing you have the advantage that you can come out of Jordanian territory, out of Turkish territory, out of Iraqi Kurdistan, out of Lebanon perhaps, and take it over. Right? So you're operating from abroad, you're invading the country. I would actually point out that rather than call this a civil war, I would not. It is, if you want, an invasion by a CIA secret army made up of death squads. It's an invasion by foreign fighters, by units of Al-Qaeda. It's low-intensity warfare, but at a fairly robust level. It's in some ways something new. It is a postmodern coup attempt. It is a postmodern attempt, again, because it attempts to destroy the modern state. What would be left if the death squads take over? Well, no doubt. Chaos, partition, subdivision, warlords, rump states, and eventually a failed state across the entire area, right? Depriving Iran of its ally and depriving Hezbollah of their logistical backup and their whole strategic depth. So when the death squads take control of these border crossings, what happens? Interestingly, the Iraqi government sealed their side of the border. They said, okay, if the death squads are controlling the other side, then we're closing the border crossing. U.S. is freaked out over that. King Abdullah of Jordan also says, watch out, Syria is now filling up with Al-Qaeda. Of course, that's true. He may be saying it to get a pretext for an early invasion, but you get the idea. So we'll be back in a minute here on World Crisis Radio. The second hour of World Crisis Radio. And keep up with everything, of course, day to day, hour to hour at tarpley.net. New things posted every couple of days at the very least. And, of course, breaking news, Webster G. Tarpley on Twitter. Just a couple of last things about the Syrian situation. This is Friday today, the 20th of July. It is the beginning of Ramadan. Normally, I think this would have been a big day for Friday prayers in a Muslim country like Syria. However, no big demonstrations to be seen. Very, very interesting. If the Assad government really were about to fall in the way that Mubarak was forced out. I mean, he was not forced out by Tahrir Square, but this played a role in the atmospherics. If we look at Syria today, 20th of July, even Al Jazeera, even the smelliest, scummiest NATO stooges cannot show you a big demonstration against Assad. No big demonstrations, no big mass of people going into the streets demanding that Assad be kicked out. That's a real weakness. I think there are some trade-offs being made. It looks like the NATO people can either get some dupes out in the street, but once they bring in the death squads, then that becomes harder and harder. Another thing is, we're wondering if rebel units have come to Damascus, what other areas have been denuded? In other words, are there areas that are now experiencing some relief from death squad activity? If the death squads are concentrated on the borders and in Damascus, in other words, I think they may be organized not according to military necessity, but according to photo op brainwashing criteria. Where do you get the best picture? Where do you get the most propaganda bang for the buck? And that may mean that a military price will have to be paid somewhat later on. So this certainly an important element. And of course, we mentioned Ramadan. We want to wish happy Ramadan to all those who are celebrating it. So we should also remember, compare this to August 20th, 2011, Operation Mermaid Dawn, the NATO attack on Tripoli. Here the difference was that the Libyan coastline was largely undefended. In other words, the Operation Mermaid Dawn that took place on August 20th, 2011 began with landings, amphibious landings by death squad figures or by foreign fighters under European NATO officers, delivering them to the coastline of Tripoli and the surrounding area. That's pretty much what led to the collapse of Gaddafi's defense system around Tripoli. This time it's harder because the coast isn't there, and what coast there is, well, that's where we can expect some Russian warships to show up. And I guess that's the other big point is the world owes a debt of gratitude to President Putin, Foreign Minister Lavrov. I would urge people to get on Twitter. I would urge people to get on Twitter about all of these themes, everything we've just been going through. We need a Twitter army. There's one of the reactionaries on radio is trying to get a Twitter army going. We should get a Twitter army. I'm calling for a Twitter army to be formed. Again, if you don't know where to start, take a look at Webster G. Tarpley. You can find things there, ideas. If you like those, retweet them. If you like to recast them, rephrase them, reformulate them, or use them as a starting point for something different, go right ahead and do that. But it is important to get inside the enemy's own apparatus, right? Because we know that various executives of Facebook and so forth have been involved in these coups in the so-called Arab Spring, right? Started by CIA limited hangout artist Julian Assange. All of that's going on. It's time to respond to them, right? To denounce them, to mock them, to point out their fraud, right? To indicate the intimate poverty of them and what they want to do. But now, Russia deserves a real vote of thanks for hanging tough, and the Chinese leadership also. And therefore, we should look at this meeting at the United Nations yesterday, the 19th of July. The veto came from Russia, the veto came from China, and there were abstentions. This is highly interesting. Pakistan must be approaching the breaking point. Pakistan abstained, and South Africa abstained. So this is despite what was obviously the most hysterical arm twisting by the United States. And somewhere on my Twitter feed, I announced that among the people who have gotten the Ribbentrop Award this season, we've got Susan Rice of the U.S. Delegation, right? She's the U.S. ambassador to the Middle East, to the UN Security Council. Sorry, she is certainly a bubbling cauldron of hate. She is a hissing viper. I can remember those caricatures of Condi Rice as a vampire. I think Miss Susan Rice deserves something similar. So Susan Rice, Sir Mark Lyle Grant, Sir Mark, and the hapless French representative Arrault have been awarded the Ribbentrop Prize for cynical hypocrisy by diplomats of aggressor states in honor of their antics at the United Nations. Now, they're going to keep coming with these resolutions, and we can only hope that Russia and China continue to veto them. Underlying this, you could see in the work of Mason and others that about the beginning of July, there was some idea that a peaceful solution for Syria had actually been in the works. And what would that be? The basis of a peaceful solution for Syria would be to say Syria belongs to a Sino-Russian sphere of influence. That is, Syria belongs to the part of the world where Russian and Chinese influence, or Chinese and Russian influence, is predominant. And therefore the U.S., NATO, the Israelis, the West will butt out of Syria. And it will not be the case that these death squads will take over the country. that's really the answer to it. In other words, it's a modus vivendi. It's a negotiated solution. It's you can call it in the spirit of Yalta, right? Yalta, obviously not good, but better than World War III, then and now. So it would be quite feasible for the U.S., the British, the French, the Israelis, and so forth to say, okay, Syria belongs to Russia, or will be under the tutelage of Russia, China, and we will therefore get out, right? When they would then say, well, we reaffirm our right to do what we want in Egypt, in Libya, in Tunisia, and so forth. This is not a good system, right? This is, in many ways, a step backward. But again, it's better than World War III, and it would at least buy some time for political maturation and indeed maybe some shifts in the military balance of power, which are likely to occur as the years go by. But I think you can see that the U.S. Ruling class has now reached the point of hysteria. I mean, you look at Hillary Clinton and her speech about how Russia and China must pay. You look at Hillary Clinton and this raving about the catastrophic assault, and then you look at the hissing viper, Miss Rice, and her story that the UN Security Council has disgraced itself and so forth. You get the idea. The U.S. ruling class is too far gone. They're too crazy to entertain a reasonable solution, which would be for them to drop it vis-a-vis Syria. I mean, to get out, to butt out of Syria. Back in a minute. World Crisis Radio, Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. A couple of last things about Syria. The reports are now that the Syrian army has regained control of most of the areas of Damascus, including the suburb of Midan, M-I-D-A-N. The 4th Armored Division of Syria seems to be working fine. The Republican Guard seems to be working fine. All the hysteria about that seems to have had very little basis. It'll be interesting to see what the Palestinians inside Syria are actually doing, the refugees that have been there for quite a while. Here's the thing. Think of the Tet Offensive by the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese way back in 1968. The standard rap, and I think it's more or less accurate, is that this was a military failure, although it became a political success because it broke the will of the American people with the help of Walter Cronkite and other commentators, that the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese were unable to hold any of the key positions that they had taken over in Saigon or the Citadel of Hue or whatever it was. And for the Viet Cong, it was basically the end of the road. Right after that, there was not much Viet Cong left. But how would that apply in this case? Is it possible that the death squads in Damascus and elsewhere have gone out on a limb to try to get this psychological impact and to stampede everybody into a panic, right, that the regime was collapsing, have a successful coup, put that on these fake channels with the help of Ben Rhodes, and has that now somehow fallen short? Really hard to say, except that it looks like the counterstrokes are now coming. I have been getting reports from a couple of observers inside Damascus who say that the casualties suffered by the death squads have been very stark, very exorbitant losses for the death squads in this entire process. So that may be the case. In other words, a lot of them may have been killed, right? A lot of them may have been liquidated, and maybe that's has something to do with this influx of foreign fighters that are coming across these various borders. All right, let's leave that alone. Let's talk a little bit about the unauthorized biography of George Bush. This week is the 20th anniversary. So we're talking about George Bush, the unauthorized biography. And it has been in print since 1992. It has been available on the Internet since October 1996. And you know that old saying, right? Habent sua fata libelli, books have their destinies. This one, I think, has had a significant impact. Maybe we start from the beginning, or more or less. This book, right, heavily researched, about 650 pages, contains a lot of material that was relevant in particular to the 1992 election campaign, and it was written with one eye on the need to get Mad Dog Bush the Elder out of office. And to that extent, it did contribute, as I'll try to point out. When the Republican National Committee heard that this book was being prepared, the book was largely written between about the time of the August coup in Moscow, August 1991. Between then and December 1991 into January 1992. So during the time that the Soviet Union was finally collapsing, this book was being prepared. I have to stress, one of the people who made the book possible was a very distinguished Russian Soviet Orientalist, and this was Grigory Lyevovich Bondarevsky. And Bondarevsky had been, I guess you could say, an advisor to Stalin. He had been an advisor in particular to the Soviet Socialist Republic of Uzbekistan, and he had written the definitive book on the Baghdad railway, the Berlin to Baghdad railway, Baghdadskaya Zhelezhnaya Doroga, I think. So he's a distinguished historian. He had worked as a consultant for international oil companies by virtue of his experience in Central Asia, and he died or was murdered under very, very suspicious circumstances in Moscow in somewhat later in the 90s. Certainly within 10 years of the book coming out, he was no longer with us. So Bondarevsky, hats off to Bondarevsky. How is he relevant? Inside the so-called LaRouche organization at that time, and that's where this project matured, it was virtually impossible to get time enough and resources enough to write a serious book. But with the endorsement of Bondarevsky, it became possible, because I said to him, look, let me just tell you some things about George Bush. And they listened to it all, took it all in, and then he said, in effect, why you don't tell world story of bastard Bush? And with that, the bureaucratic logjam, right, the insufferable, stifling anti-intellectual atmosphere was somehow broken, at least for this project. So, part of the project then was to research the 1964 Senate election, and this is worth coming back to because of the importance of Texas and things going on down there. And I've told this story a couple of times in the last few weeks, but worth telling it again. Senator Ralph Webster Yarborough of Texas was really the leading Southern Democrat in the post-New Deal situation of the 60s, even into the 70s. But in the 50s to the 60s, it was Ralph Webster Yarborough, as I was always proud to note. He had a very, very interesting personal story, probably not worth going into, but he gave me access to his papers at the University of Texas in Austin, and I got to go through the story of how he defeated George H.W. Bush for the Senate in the year 1964. What was his approach? And that's a whole chapter of this Bush bio. We'll be back in a minute. World Crisis Radio. So we're talking about George Bush, the unauthorized biography. 20 years ago this week, press conference at the National Press Club. It was about 40 to 50 representatives of the world press, and I stress the world press. The biggest single group was from the Far East, Japan, South Korea, places like this. They were highly interested. Latin Americans were interested. Arab world, Eastern, Southern Europe, highly interested. Northern Europe, Western Europe, not so much. British might have been there. I think Ambrose Evans Pritchard, at that time the correspondent here of the London Daily Telegraph, he may have stopped by. But the U.S., of course, AWOL, U.S. press, clearly corrupt at that point, and so forth. So a lot of work in the chapter on the story about how Senator Yarborough defeated Bush in 1964. And the story with that was that Senator Yarborough then came to regard that chapter, even though it was in the middle of this book about George Bush, that this was the best summary that anyone had ever written of Senator Yarborough's career. And he ordered a case of these books when they came out in the middle of 1992. And then, during that campaign, that fall, it was, of course, Clinton-Gore against Bush-Quayle. Whenever Clinton and or Gore came to Texas in order to maximize their popular appeal, they always demanded that Senator Yarborough would come along with them and campaign. And in every case, he told me, he would always bring copies of George H.W. Bush, or George Bush, the Unauthorized Biography, July 1992, and put them into the hands of Clinton and Gore, saying, look, this tells you what you have to do. You've got to get out there for the people, fight for the people, and not for various moneyed interests. Now, obviously, that didn't work out too well, but Senator Ralph Yarborough was a great guy. I also we have some material in the book about Wright Patman, another great Texas populist. The part about Watergate shows that the Watergate that won the day, so to speak, was the CIA version of Watergate. It was the Woodward, Bernstein, McCord, Gordon Liddy, and so forth, like the spook community. But there was another Watergate. There were real crimes committed by Nixon, obviously, and the person who was interested in going after those was Congressman Wright Patman of Texas. And in honor of that fact, right, that Wright Patman is one of the first people who said, follow the money, I gave, as soon as this book came out, and even a couple of days before the press conference, I remember walking over to the House of Representatives and going to the office of Representative Henry Gonzalez of Texas, who had inherited the mantle of Wright Patman. And Henry Gonzalez later sent me a very nice card, right, thanking me for the book. So all of these different elements. There's stuff in here. I got material from the late Sarah McClendon, because one of the people that figures in the book is her brother, I think, Gordon McClendon. Anyway, there's a whole story of Texas politics which is included in it. Some very, very interesting revelations then. In chronological order through the book, we'll start it and see how far we get. Very, very dramatic, of course, is the fact that Prescott Bush, the father of the then candidate, the grandfather now of the more recent disastrous, catastrophic president, George Bush the Younger, that Prescott Bush was, of course, the managing partner of Brown Brothers Harriman. This was the most powerful, largest investment bank, largest in terms of money and most powerful in terms of politics. Between the two world wars, it was Brown Brothers Harriman, and that included brothers of Harriman, Averell Harriman, Roland alias Bunny Harriman, but then also Robert Lovett, who went on to choose the Kennedy cabinet and essentially set the Kennedy presidency on the road to various severe problems to which it eventually succumbed. But the managing partner, the guy who sat in the back office, was Prescott Bush, and it turned out that in the 1920s he had linked up with Fritz Thyssen to create the Union Banking Corporation in Lower Manhattan, and that entity then, under the control of Thyssen, was used to funnel money from Thyssen's investments in North America over to the Dutch bank, Bank voor Handel en Scheepvaart, and that was then used to buy weapons and to otherwise support the seizure of power by Hitler. And that Prescott Bush, not only that, but by virtue of his institutional position, he was in effect a part of the management structure of certain German cartels which controlled Auschwitz and other death camps, parts of the SS state, the SS war economy, where people were literally worked to death in order to extract the value contained in their bodies. So also then the story of how in October 1942, Leo J. Crowley, a well-known figure at the time, the alien property custodian, had seized the shares of stock owned by Prescott Bush in the Union Banking Corporation on the grounds that this Union Banking Corporation was an enemy entity, an enemy alien controlled by Nazis from Germany and Hungary. And that's this Thyssen family, right? I think the Thyssen-Bornemisza Foundation somehow reflects the German-Hungarian connection. But anyway, in those days, it was seized. And then there's another story about how the Bush family actually got this money back. Now, that part in particular became then common knowledge. And by the time, for example, about 10 years later, right, from 1992 to 2003, when I went to the San Francisco 9/11 conference organized by Carol Brûlé, they had part of their handouts and logos was behind every terrorist there is a Bush. So you have Hitler and then Prescott Bush and then Osama bin Laden and Bush the Younger. But the idea was that by 10 years after the time this book came out, practically everybody in the world knew that Bush's father had these intimate relations with the Nazis, with Thyssen in particular, and that he was complicit in financing and indeed arming the Nazi Party to take over in Germany. And this idea, of course, then has been borrowed, purloined, stolen, plagiarized. You can use all sorts of terms. You can think of any number, right? Sometimes people who are themselves mythomaniacs, who are trying to get attention, come forward and seek to identify themselves with this discovery. There was a guy who actually, he started off in New Hampshire, right, in one of the New Hampshire weeklies. He started with this, and he eventually convinced himself that the discovery had been his all along. I'm sorry. It comes out of this book. Kevin Phillips, American Dynasty, right, about the Bush family. His method is interesting. Instead of just taking this stuff silently, he says, this book has massive, often revelatory research, but the authors are lost in snowbanks of paranoia. That's Kevin Phillips. Well, you're welcome, Kevin. We'll be back in a minute. A few more minutes now on the story of George Bush, the unauthorized biography. And the story, of course, is that this is the fountainhead from which all other accounts of Prescott Bush supporting Thyssen, who in turn supported Hitler, all of this comes from George Bush, the unauthorized biography. It's the first one that has the vesting order from Leo Crowley, the alien property custodian, the story of Union Banking Corporation, the headlines in the New York Herald Tribune and other papers, and so forth. It's also interesting, if you look at somebody like George Seldes. George Seldes was active in those years, right? In 1942, he would have been in the midst of his, the prime of his activity. You'd think that he would have something to say about Prescott Bush and Brown Brothers Harriman, but for some reason he doesn't, because he's got all kinds of other people who were around at the time, and he's very quick to point out connections that people have to Nazism, fascism, and so forth. But anyway, you've got, various mythomaniacs. You've got Kevin Phillips taking this stuff and then insulting me as paranoid. Then you've got Russ Baker, right? The family of secrets, the Bush dynasty. How about that? I have to confess, I haven't seen this. I don't know how he handles it. I do see that I am not in the index. I don't know. Maybe I'm in the footnotes. I'll have to take a look. But still, if he's got the stuff about Thyssen, which I think he's going to have, well, then maybe he doesn't have the stuff about Thyssen. But if he does have it, then that comes from George Bush, the unauthorized biography. So when the Republican National Committee found out that this book was being prepared, they first of all said, don't publish it until after the November election. And there were some people in this entity that I was working with at the time who thought, yeah, that would be a good idea. Let's not make any more enemies. But I didn't want to do that. I thought it was important to publish it so the voters could know. And one of the things was, of course, that the U.S. news organizations had completely failed to tell you the truth about Bush the Elder. This was called the Red Studebaker School of Journalism, right? That whenever you found an account that said George H.W. Bush went to Midland, Texas, in the 1940s in an old beat-up Red Studebaker, you knew that you were dealing with the family printout. And I actually met a guy now, I think he's still around, or maybe not, Doug Caddy of Houston, Galveston, Texas, had been offered the job of taking a pile of family press releases and other approved material and concocting yet another campaign bio for Bush out of that, which he then did not do. So the Republican National Committee wanted the book suppressed or delayed, and then when it came out, the opinion from the Republican National Committee was that it contained sufficient scandal material to defeat Bush in a close election. And it may be, obviously there's no way to say this for sure, that's what it did in the following sense. The part about the book that would have been most relevant is the Iran-Contra chapter, where, of course, it's clear that George H.W. Bush was the covert operations czar of the Reagan administration, right? Reagan, the well-known sleepwalker, the somnambulist, sleepwalking through his presidency, right, signing papers, not knowing what he was doing, the wife controlled by an astrologer, all that. But that really operating behind the scenes, directing the covert operation, was George Bush of the CIA. It looks like this family of secrets by Russ Baker seems to think it's a discovery that the Bush family are connected to the spook world, to the OSS and the CIA. Well, no, that's no discovery at all, right? The Bush biography tells you, for example, that there's a pretty good case that Bush the Elder was involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion, right? The Barbara Bush, being one of the chartered freighters that was being used by the CIA to try to land the battalion of anti-Castro Cubans on the island. So Iran-Contra, the relevance of Iran-Contra is that it was right before the election, the ruling elite or factions of it signaled that they were fed up with George H.W. Bush by having various people, including Caspar Weinberger and others, high-level people, Claire George and any number of others, indicted in Iran. And it was clear that George H.W. Bush's name was going to go on the witness list, and that is what he responded to by pardoning the main people involved after he lost the election, and that is in December of 1992. But now, quickly, since time is short, what else do we find out here of interest? The Permian Basin Gang is the basis of a family alliance between the Bushes and Henry Kravis, right? Henry Kravis of Kohlberg, Kravis Roberts, still around, still going to the Bilderberger Group. Carolyn Rome, no longer in the picture. Rubbers goes to Congress. That was Bush's nickname. I think Wilbur Mills called him Rubbers because he was always talking about family planning, contraception, birth control, and he is the guy who brought Bernstein and Shockley to the Congress to begin spewing their eugenics, which was in a very bad odor because it had been so much associated with the Nazis. In Watergate, of course, Bush, the chairman of the Republican Party, a major Watergate figure, he is close to this guy Lou Russell, who is one of the central figures of this, completely neglected by Woodward and Bernstein in terms of understanding what happened. Lou Russell died under mysterious circumstances just at the point when an operation to sort of counterattack the prevailing version of the scandal was being prepared, and George H.W. Bush had become aware of what was going on and may have taken steps to stop it from happening. All of that included in that chapter. So there's also this famous quote. I can't say it on the air here. I don't think I can anyway. About Bush's reaction. The smoking gun tape. The smoking gun tape is not the part that was erased. If that were true, it wouldn't be the smoking gun tape. The smoking gun tape is a part of the Nixon-Watergate tapes where Nixon essentially talks about how he's going to commit perjury, exactly how he's going to do it, in detail. And he says, the Texans have got to be told to testify this, that, and the other thing. Well, who are the Texans? The Texans are none other than George Bush the Elder and Chairman Mao Liedtke, his business partner, people who had worked on Zapata Petroleum, Pennzoil, and they're later involved in this attempted takeover of by Texaco taking over Getty Oil. And in this case, the interesting story is that the judge that finally ruled against Texaco and in favor of essentially the Bush interests, the Getty Oil and others, right? This guy, Chairman Mao Liedtke. The judge who had handed down this verdict is Tough Tony Farris, and Tough Tony Farris was a political appointee of George Bush years and years before, so he should have recused himself, and these high-powered lawyers didn't know it. Anyway, there's a wealth of material, 650 pages, and a wonderful time to go out and buy a copy and read it. Summer reading, if you're headed to the beach, George Bush, the Unauthorized Biography. Online since 1996, there is one chapter online that you won't find in the book, the CIA cover-up of a Kennedy assassination.
Hi, this is